What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids? Today, this is the second part of our first two-part interview series, podcast episode thing.
Yeah, first time doing a two-parter. Thank you, Mike, for being willing to stick around for so long and take so much time out of your day.
Hey, I'm happy to get the word out. I like your vibe, and I think it's good for people to hear about this kind of stuff.
Well, we appreciate you.
Jordan has a pretty good vibe,
Yeah,
for the most part.
try to. Uh,
Just kidding.
if y'all joined us last week, we had this two-part episode, and we spent most of the time talking with Justin from Men for Equity and Reproductive Justice, and Mike, who we have with us right now from Elevated Access. Just kind of provided some support and clarity because their organizations have similar missions and a lot of overlap. And Mike was the person who introduced me to Justin as well. And today, now we just want to give Mike an opportunity to really talk about his organization, Elevated Access, and help share that with you guys. So, Mike, will you please just tell us about yourself, your organization? Let us know what Elevated Access is, what you do, why you're blurry.
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So I'm Mike. I'm executive director and founder of Elevated Access. We are an organization of hundreds of volunteer pilots all over the United States that provides our time, our resources, our talent of flying airplanes to get people from where they are to where they can get healthcare that they need, whether that be abortion or gender affirming care is our focus, and that could be because they just don't have a provider that's available in their state or in their where they live, because even in places like California, it's not like you can walk to any clinic, any hospital and get an abortion. You have to go to specific places, and for some people, it's traveling from places where abortion is banned or restricted and going to places where they can get the care that they need. And so we've been in around, officially existed for about 2.5 years, and started out right about officially right as the weekend going into when the Dobbs opinion leaked. And so we've grown quite a bit, and we started out where I was doing this just in my free time, and I thought this might be my free time thing until I retired in hopefully many years still. But it turned into a second full-time job, and eventually we had enough money that I said to the board, like, hey, I'm working two full-time jobs to get this organization off the ground, and I think I want to do this full-time. And so here I am, and here we are.
Oh, that's awesome. So you yourself are a pilot then?
Yep. Yep, I'm a pilot. I primarily fly for fun or recreationally, but I'm also a flight instructor. And then, of course, I volunteer time flying people. In fact, I flew somebody yesterday for Elevated Access. And when I do that, I'm paying for that out of my own pocket. Elevated Access doesn't pay for those expenses.
Okay. Now, again, if you're just listening to this audio only, you don't see this, but we look like we're interviewing Mike, like he's a CIA informant or something, for
Which would be cool, Mike, if you are that,
Yeah.
as well. Blink twice.
If, for all you know, that could be the case. I'm in the witness protection program. I didn't admit it. I'm sorry.
Yep. So he's got his camera blurred. Obviously you take anonymity. I can never say this word.
Anonymity.
I don't know why. Anonymity. Just
You're so close.
Nope, it's just not gonna come. You take that word in privacy very seriously. And can you explain why there's such a need for such extreme steps? I mean, obviously you use a pseudonym, not your real name. You blur your camera. You try to limit how much personal information you give out, even as to like what part of the country you live in and things like that. Can you explain what the need is for that?
Yeah. Yeah, so really it's twofold. So one is being a white man working in this space. I'm not here to center myself, and so part of it is so that by not using my real name, it's clear that I'm not out here for notoriety or to be famous or my own clout or anything like that. Because certainly I'm really not directly affected in terms of my own health care and things like so many of the people that we're helping. Other part of it is, there are people that have that work in this space that regularly get bomb threats, shooting threats. There have been abortion clinic workers that have been shot at church for working in an abortion clinic. I mean, it's a real thing, and maybe to my benefit, we started this organization after J6, and so it's like, okay, we're going to take this seriously and make sure we protect our staff, our volunteers, our passengers as much as we can to make sure that they can't be easily targeted for participating in either supporting this healthcare or receiving this healthcare.
Yeah, like the FBI, like their biggest concern with the domestic security is not other countries
Oh,
generally.
yeah.
It's domestic terrorist groups or domestic like conservative militias, that sort of stuff.
It's
So-
white dudes that haven't gotten laid in a really long time. Those are the
yeah. It's some crazy mother truckers who believe that they should impart violence on people because they don't believe in them in this country where freedom of belief is supposed to be a founding pillar. But
freedom. I believe in my freedom to subject you to my beliefs, and if you don't believe them, I believe in my freedom to inflict pain and suffering and possibly death upon you.
exactly.
Yeah. No. Well, and I mean, and it makes sense too because you think about it, like people who wish to do us harm from other countries have to get here from the other country with stuff to do us harm, and that's a big obstacle. Where like the domestic terrorists have the advantage of being, domestic,
Right, and a hardware store and
Yeah.
gun and legal, gun purchasing abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is a real thing. Like, when I started this work, we added a second ring camera to our back door to have, security cameras going both directions, all directions on our house. I've been, um, have been carrying around the identification card you need in Illinois to own a firearm for years. And I was like, okay, I think it's finally time. And so, we have a shotgun to make sure that, if somebody were to show up at our house, that, we can protect ourselves. Because we
You
know,
need an ID card in Illinois to have a shotgun in your house.
yeah, the firearm owner's identification card. And that's so that,
That is insane.
Welcome to the new
It's-
America, brother.
and
This
it's
is the America Obama wants.
We've had that in Illinois for a long time. In fact, I worked at a farm supply store when I was in high school, and even back then, people had to show their FOID card to buy ammunition or to buy a firearm out of that store.
God,
So it's
that
been a
is
long time.
nuts. Yeah, I mean, I knew that they had some really restrictive firearm laws. I mean, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I know I've committed a felony a few times just driving through the corner of Illinois to other places with a firearm in the vehicle. But like, I didn't realize that you had to have it just to have one in your home. That's wild to me.
Well, and really, because in order to get it, you're gonna have get the ammunition, get anything, you're gonna have to show that ID card to purchase it. So, like when I bought the shotgun, I had to show that card in order to walk out the store with it. So it doesn't
That's
matter where
crazy.
you're gonna
Yeah.
keep it, but yeah.
So crazy. It is crazy that you have to have it to buy ammunition too. Like there's no such restrictions here or any place that I've lived before. So that's wild to me. Like I said, I knew, and I thought, like, I guess the restrictive gun laws I thought centered more around the city of Chicago, kind of like New York City has like more restrictive gun laws than the rest of the state. I didn't realize it was like a statewide type thing, but that's crazy. But no, I feel your need for security. I haven't taken that as seriously as I should doing what I do. Partially because I never thought that I would gain as much attention, I think, as I have doing stuff on social media. And the cat's enough out of the bag where if anybody is really motivated to figure out who I am, it's not that hard. I'm genuinely one of those people who's not going to live in fear. If it's my time, I guess it's my time. If somebody's gonna be crazy enough to do that, but I've definitely put it.
you definitely walk around in your property enough, like showing all where the buildings are. That like if somebody knew like the general vicinity of you and like spent a little bit of time on some Google Maps data.
I mean, and if they're willing to take the risk, because again, we don't need special cards to own guns here, so it's or buy ammunition. And I got a really long driveway and dogs, but I did add quite a few security cameras now to the property as well for the same reasons, because you get death threats for supporting these kinds of movements on the internet as well. So
Which so they the conservatives always are like, oh, so much for tolerance, and it's like, yeah, we're not the ones threatening to like kill you. We're just like, I think you're dumb, and I
Yeah.
think you're morally corrupt for believing in what you believe.
But I'm not threatening to come into your house and murder you. Like, that is never something that I would do or am going to do. Yeah, but no,
There's a lot less leftist, terrorist organizations or just.
Haven't you heard of Antifa and BLM, man?
You're right. You got me there. So much.
Oh, geez. For when that's future misquoted when I run for president or something, that was sarcasm.
Too late.
Yeah,
You've been clipped.
they'll just clip that right off the end. But anyway, so Mike, sorry, we got way derailed there, which is the usual for this.
Is that what happened there? I just
No
sort of
worries.
blacked out.
If you want to have me back later for a gun show, we can do that.
Oh, absolutely. I'd be down for that. How did you specifically decide this was something you were going to do, that you were going to get involved in? Again, it's a beautiful thing to pick to do, but sort of random, being straight white guy. Like, hey, this is the cause that I'm gonna pick up my flag and run with, type of thing.
Yeah, so after George Floyd's murder, my wife and I had been looking for what more we could do to resist racism, white supremacy, and so we had been, because voting wasn't enough anymore, protesting wasn't enough anymore. I mean, those things don't change anything, especially in your community. And it's like, so what can we do to like serve our communities and do more in this way? And so we one of her cousins was running a affinity group of white people to around anti-racism, and she was about halfway through it, and she's like, you really should do this one too, I think you'd like it. And so I signed up for it, and it was in that anti-racism workshop where I learned about reproductive justice, which again, the 4 pillars of reproductive justice are the right to control your own body and your own future, the right to have children, the right to not have children, and the right to raise children in safe and healthy environments. And at the time, I called myself pro-choice, but it really wasn't until thinking about that, like this is back in 2021, late 2020, and thinking about that, if you lived in Alabama in 2020, 2021, there was one abortion clinic in Alabama. And so if you didn't live in the same town where that clinic was, you were going to have to travel. And so I thought to myself, as a pilot, I had been looking for some sort of just social justice cause that I could use this skill and resource to help people. And there are other volunteer pilot organizations out there that do like animal rescue. There's organizations that fly people to get specialized health treatment, like go to fly the Mayo Clinic or things like that. And but they just didn't speak to me on that social justice level. And so knowing that people might be having to travel, especially from rural communities, to places that provided abortion care, I figured there had to be organizations out there that did that kind of work. And so with a little bit of Googling, found Midwest Access Coalition, who this summer had their 10-year anniversary of being around. They've been helping people within the Midwest, traveling to the Midwest to get access to abortion. And they provide things like money, bus tickets. They give people gas money. They provide lodging. They help people with childcare expenses, all that kind of stuff. And so I reached out to them and volunteered to do anything they might need. Ended up doing IT security and privacy work, but also said I wanted to talk to you about this idea that pilots maybe could help people get to where they needed to go.
Okay. So you could say that you have a particular set of skills, and you will fly them, and you will help them.
Yes.
So cheesy.
Yes, indeed.
It's amazing you're not a dad yet.
Yeah, just practicing, getting ready.
So now, I have been fortunate enough in my life to have probably a little bit more experience around the aviation community than an average person. Obviously not as much as you or most of the people involved with elevated access, but growing up, for the purposes of this story. We'll call him my stepdad. He got his general aviation pilot's license when I was a kid. So and in South Florida. So I had some great experiences as a kid flying to the Bahamas and the Keys and around South Florida. In a sundowner, and then another person my mom dated for a while had a Cirrus I got to go up in, and um, then another person that she was with, who I'm still very close with, he's got a Beechcraft Bonanza that I was able to. The very first trip I ever took Emily, my wife, on, obviously before we were married, we went down to South Florida. And we flew her to the Keys. In that, took her right down to the deck over the water without her knowing it, doing about 200 miles an hour. And nothing quite expresses the speed until you get 20 feet off the water, and it feels like the waves are splashing the bottom of the plane. And so I love this stuff, and it was surprising to me because I've always really enjoyed the aviation industry and aviation history and everything like that. Go to air shows as often as will allow me to, and I wanted to go to Oshkosh a few years back, and Emily's like, "Well, you always wanted to go. Let's just go." So we
Nice.
went out there, and it was 2019. And being around this for so long, and I don't know how I didn't know, or I have better connections, I guess, better choice in people to associate with, but the amount of Trump flags and Trump hats and everything, with people who are obviously have enough functioning brain cells to fly an airplane, that were at Oshkosh, which for those of you who don't know, EAA, it's like the biggest air show in the world, probably, at least in the country for sure.
It is the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's half a million people. I've heard the stat that one of every 8 small airplanes in the United States is there at some point that week.
Yeah, it's insane.
One of every 8.
It's so cool. If you haven't had the opportunity to go, don't let my Trump flag thing scare you. If you like airplanes at all, it is a super cool experience. But I was so unpleasantly surprised at how conservative the aviation community actually is. So but on top of that, I also now know more than one person who volunteers for your organization. And so from my anecdotal experience, it seems like you must have decent membership, but I would assume it would be hard to recruit members for your organization. How has that been going? Are the members you have in the places you need them as well? Because I assume it'd be more difficult to recruit in the conservative areas where these types of procedures are restricted, and probably where you need the people the most. How does that work? How is that going?
Sure. And so when I first launched our website, which was the Friday night before the Dobbs opinion leaked, it was myself and 2 other pilots. That was all we had,
Mhm.
and everybody that had been working in abortion access and abortion rights knew what the Dobbs opinion was going to be, that it was going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and so I knew, like, I need to get this website up and get recruiting done, because I know before the end of the term they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade. And that Friday night happened to be, like I said, the Friday night before the leak of the Dobbs opinion, and the urgency, because I think similar to what I think you said on your abortion podcast, you didn't think that they were actually going to do it.
Mhm.
I still had hope that they wouldn't do it, but I still expected that they would. But obviously, with actually seeing the draft opinions, like, the urgency went up to 11, and I knew that we weren't going to do much with 3 pilots. And I thought, well, I need to be more active in trying to recruit more. And so obviously I had our website live. But so I reached out to a mutual TikTok friend of mine by the name of Cheese Pilot. I don't know if you've seen any of his content, but he was posting a lot of, he was flying for an airline at the time. He was posting a lot of, like, pro-union, a lot of progressive content and things like that. And I said, hey, Cheese Pilot, would you maybe make a post about this organization I'm trying to start? I'm trying to stay under the radar, pun partially intended. And we're going to need more pilots. And I think people will listen to you. Maybe you'll get us 5 or 6 pilots out of it, and that would be cool, because that would triple what we have now.
Mhm.
Um, Well, long story short is his content went viral to the point that like some of the huge creators on TikTok were reusing his audio, reduetting him, and stuff like that. And by the time we got to the actual decision date in late June of when the official opinion came out, we had over 500 pilots that
Oh
said they wanted
wow.
to be part of our network across the country. So going from three to over 500. So we have before I made the website live, we because we do also we support abortion and gender affirming care. I had asked a trans pilot friend of mine like look things over, make sure I use the right language around gender affirming care to make
Hmm.
sure I didn't miss something, that kind of stuff. And one of the things that she said was like, "This is really awesome, Mike. I'll sign up, as soon as I can. But do you think you're going to get any pilots? Because everybody in the aviation community. Part of the reason why I, blur my face too is my parents don't know what I do because my parents are still conservatives, and I'd like to maintain that relationship with them in a way that's not awful.
I understand that.
And so, but also there's a lot of pilots that like we had. Pilots in our community get upset when we changed the name of our end of year party from a Christmas party to end of year party because we had some non Christian members and they were like, why are we changing the name to not say Christmas anymore? And so it's a real thing about how conservative the aviation community is. But I have been more than pleasantly, more than shockingly surprised. I mean, just absolutely blown away. And our pilots, when they apply, they have to give us all their pilot credentials. They have to tell us why they want to volunteer, give us some statements around abortion, gender affirming care, and also provide a couple references that we can talk to. And whether it's hearing their own personal reasons for why they want to sign up, whether it be hearing from the references about how this is the most kind-hearted, gentle man that I know in my whole life, and he just wants to help people. You should put him on your roster of pilots. Um, and so we now have, through that vetting process, as you can imagine, there's a lot of work that goes into that to make sure that they're fully lined up with our values. Because, if they say they only support abortion up until, say, like 22 weeks or something like that, they don't go on our roster. If they support gender affirming care for adults but not for minors under any circumstances, whatever shape that may take, we say sorry, you can't be on our roster. So it takes a lot of time to get through all that. And so we have all but Alaska, Wyoming, and Rhode Island have pilots in them.
Wow.
Some of the places that you'd be shocked by, now mind you, population in Texas is huge,
Hmm.
but Texas has dozens of pilots for us that have volunteered. Florida has dozens of pilots that have volunteered. And so really, short of crossing the Rockies, which gets into its own little trickiness when it comes to small aircraft, pretty much everywhere we can go from anywhere to anywhere in our small aircraft to get people where they need to go. And we do all that for free. The pilots pay for all the expense of the flight, the fuel, the time on the airplane, any airport fees, that kind of stuff. And even though we're trying to get a fuel reimbursement program set up through the FAA to make that within the regulations. A lot of our pilots really have just said, I really don't care about getting reimbursed. I want to just help people because they have this privilege and skill that they know can really make a difference for people. And so here we are with now over 1,200 flights, approaching 1 million miles here coming up soon, probably before the end of the year or sometime in January.
That's incredible. How many pilots do you have now?
So let's see, we have had over 1,500 that have said they want to join our network. And so when they say they want to join, we send them that application that gets all their pilot credentials and all those statements that I
Hmm.
mentioned. We have about 600 of those applications, and then a little bit over 400 have completed the vetting process. So we still have a little bit of a backlog of pilots. We have a lot of pilots. One thing that surprises people is that airline pilots don't often like fly small airplanes anymore.
Hmm.
In fact, a lot of them don't really remember quite how to do it well. And so we have a number of airline pilots like, hey, I want to help. I don't have access to a plane right now, but I want to be on the roster in case there's something I can do. So we do have a number of pilots that, just don't have access to an airplane right now, but want to be sure they're on our roster. So if we maybe make the call to them, maybe they can do some favor asking or things like that around with their contacts and friends to try to figure out what can
Well,
happen.
that was a cheese pilot too. When he started off, did not have access. He was a commercial pilot, did not have access to his own plane, from what I understand, going back through his content
Hmm.
and talking to him a little bit. And also interesting, just going through the need to be anonymous. He kind of received some backlash for participating with your organization, and it sounds like, and obviously I've just heard his side of the story, and I don't know all the details, but it sounds like he got targeted by a conservative aviation medical examiner who dug up stuff from private medical records that he maybe shouldn't have had access to ground him in what sounds like retribution for his participation in your organization, and he's all but lost his livelihood for associating kind of publicly with you
Mhm.
guys. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. You know, like you said, the aviation community is pretty conservative, and so and it's also pretty small. So, pretty much everybody knows everybody, especially when you get to like kind of a local community. And you know, Adrian is a veteran. He Chief's pilot. He's a veteran, and he had some pretty bad stuff happen to him in Afghanistan, and he wanted to talk to somebody about it while he was there. And so him just talking to somebody turned into basically as a reason for him to have to go through a whole bunch of stuff. And this really goes for all pilots. Like the mental health kind of approach from the FAA is very backwards, to the point that like now it's starting to change a smidge, but. And you go back 2 years ago, if you went to talk to a therapist, because maybe one of your parents died, and you wanted to talk to a therapist, you'd probably lose your ability to fly for several months, if not a couple years, and have to pay thousands of dollars to prove that you were safe to fly an airplane. And so one of the things that we did, because we're pretty confident that this medical examiner went digging to try to find a reason to deny or defer chief pilot's medical. We told him like that the least we can do is pay for all of your testing expenses and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
because you've done so much for the organization. I've offered him other opportunities and things too, but he's definitely not looking for riches and glory or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
He really just wants to do the right things, and so I love him to death, and you know I'm happy every time I get a chance to see him.
Yeah, he seems like a very nice guy, and but he was kind of trying to crowdfund to get access to a plane before all that happened. When I
Hmm.
was digging back through his stuff as well. I do. I'm curious if I know a few years back, quite a few years back, and I'm going completely off of memory right now, but commercial airline like flew into the side of a mountain, and it was sort of thought that the pilot was maybe just committing suicide and bringing everybody along with him. Do you recall that at all?
Yeah, you're probably thinking of the Skywings incident that happened in with a German pilot, but in the Alps.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there was it was definitively it was suicide, and so we do want to make sure that pilots are not having suicidal thoughts and ideation, but like there's a big distance between levels of depression or mental health, and
Mm-hmm.
that is at that point, and just like, hey, I'm just kind of sad. I need to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
There's a big
No,
spectrum
I
between
I
there.
I a
But
hundred
yeah,
percent
Yeah.
agree. But
yeah,
obviously the aviation industry is overly cautious about things
yeah,
because one, flying, especially commercial, not necessarily GA as much, but
mhm,
certainly commercial is the safest way to travel. And it's the perception of one plane crash can do massive amounts of damage to the aviation
yeah,
industry, even though you could have 10 planes crash a year and it'd still probably be the safest way to travel because thousands of cars crash every day, and thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people die every year in auto accidents, but it's just that perception. So
yeah.
I give
Well,
a
and
little bit
really,
of
and
leeway to the FAA
yeah,
on like taking that issue really seriously,
yeah.
but
Well, and I completely agree on that part of it. The part that is dysfunctional is that it takes 6 months at a time for the FAA to give you an answer about anything.
mm,
And so theoretically, let's say somebody, the FAA is like, we want you to do 6 months with a particular doctor of appointments for 6 months to make sure that they say that you're good
Cleared.
to fly. Um, Now, the way the FAA way their process works, though, that 6 months of treatment is actually going to take about 2 years because of their bureaucracy is just that slow. And so it's not just even going, maybe somebody doesn't even have to go through that 6 months of treatment. Maybe it's just like one test. That one test isn't going to be like, oh, the FAA thinks I should go take this test after I submitted my materials on Tuesday, so I'm gonna go get this test here in a couple of weeks, and then I'll be back to flying in a month. No, it's years when this stuff happens, which is really the big part of the injustice. Like, be vigilant, yes, but don't take so damn long.
I feel deep in my soul, I just have a gut feeling that this is Ronald Reagan's fault. I can't say for certain because I haven't researched it, but I feel like I know this is Ronald Reagan's fault.
It's like rolling a 20-sided die, and then just knowing that most of the sides
are
or the more sides than any other thing is Ronald Reagan and his administration's fault.
Just the bureaucracy and slowing up the FAA. I feel like it somehow leads back to Reagan, all roads lead to Reagan.
And that's a lot of why, and it's a lot of that's why, we tell our pilots, like, be very careful about, who you identify yourself to. Thankfully this work kind of, the generic term, kind of like the Kleenex version of tissue. For us, the kind of version of that is angel flight. Is kind of a understood term to mean that you're, flying somebody to get access to healthcare, and that's usually as specific you need to be. If anybody asks, like, oh, can I get a fuel discount if I'm doing an angel flight? Can I get the landing fee waived if I'm doing an angel flight? Those kinds of questions, or like, even in my own flying club, people have asked me like, "Oh, where'd you go? When you took out one of the planes last week?" "Oh, I did an angel flight type flight." And that's because I don't know where they stand, and if I don't know where they stand, I'm not gonna say like, "Oh, as far as I don't know the purpose of somebody's travel," because it's part of our security and privacy practice, and because we work primarily by referral, and so it could be somebody traveling for an abortion or gender affirming care, but I don't need to say that to another pilot who I don't trust on that issue.
Well, I mean, yeah, it could be, they need to see a specialist for a heart surgeon or something along those lines. So that makes total sense. Speaking of like the funding and the resources and the pilots kind of paying for all of this stuff themselves, I'm gonna have a little bit of a hard devil's advocate question for you here, but first, do the pilots at least get to write off their expenses for participating in these angel flights? I mean, I'm assuming you're a nonprofit, obviously, and so they get to at least write that off in that sense. And most
we're a 501c3, so they're considered what's called in-kind donations. So talk to your tax accountant, but typically in-kind donations on behalf of a 501c3 are tax deductible. That said, during part of Trump's tax reforms was a change to standard deduction. So for some of our pilots, they probably are not taking the standard deduction to where charitable donations make a difference. But like for me, like I do a lot of flights for elevated access, but even with that, I still don't get to to doing itemized deductions instead of standardized.
No, I mean that's surprising, just because obviously it's not a poor man's hobby for sure. Flying, it can cost about $100 to $200 an hour when you factor in maintenance and fuel. Which
so
is
like,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, so, I did about 5 hours of flying yesterday for somebody, flying them round trip for an appointment, and I haven't run the final numbers, but it probably cost me about $600 or $700 for that. And so I can afford to do about one of those a month because, like I said, I'm also a flight instructor, so I use my flight instructor income to subsidize my flying for elevated access.
And that's super admirable of you. And obviously, like, they're expensive to fly. I don't think anybody's under the disillusion that private planes are cheap. But that kind of also
my flying club has 90 members, and we own 7 airplanes, so that kind of gives you a sense of what it takes to make it not cheap, but make it affordable.
And I think that that's a good point to point out, that probably a lot of people sort of outside the aviation industry don't know, is that most planes are community owned. Like you have a flying club like you're a part of, where people own partnership in an airplane and you all split all of the costs of those airplanes. So you all have access, and then you use it like a timeshare, basically.
Mhm.
You get your every other weekend with it, or you put your name on a schedule for when you want to use it,
Yep.
or however it works out with your fly club rules. Obviously, that comes with a lot of benefits of getting more affordable access into an airplane. I'm sure it also comes with a ton of custody nightmares and who's paying for what and who can afford what type of things. I know my the person who owns the Bonanza, who I fly with. He was part of a fly club with the Bonanza, and one of the members did a wheel up landing just because they forgot that the wheels
Ooh.
go back down again. And that does extensive damage. You know, it wrecks the prop. The entire airframe needs to be inspected again before it can be airworthy. A whole bunch of stuff, and then it was due for new avionics on top of that, which is again not cheap. And it was a smaller fly club, so a lot of the people that were involved, including the person who did the wheel up landing, didn't really have the money to put into fixing these kinds of things. And I know the plane was grounded for like 2 years because they were fighting over that, until he finally just started putting the parts on himself because he wanted to fly the plane again, and took that out and eventually ended up taking that out of their shares and then buying them out of the rest of it. So I can imagine there's a lot of headaches that come with the flying club aspect of it, but at least.
Yeah, that so yeah, so the way the flying club I'm in now isn't quite structured that way, but like the old flying club I was in was kind of what we call an equity club.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like owning a share. So there were 10 members, so we all owned 1/10 of the airplane and our bank balance. And so when we wanted to make an avionics upgrade to that airplane, I think if I remember correctly, the quote from the shop was about 30 grand,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't have 30 grand sitting around, but you know what? I do have $3,000
Mm-hmm.
that I could spend on that. It's still not a trivial amount of money for me to spend by any means, but to get a big upgrade in the airplane I like to fly, yeah, I'll pay $3,000
Mm-hmm.
for that because I'll get lots of value out of that over time.
Yeah, absolutely. But then that kind of brings me to, again, the hard question, the devil's advocate question, and don't feel like I'm picking on you here, but private planes being notoriously not cheap. Why is this approach to helping people get the care they need appropriate, and not, just a
Sure.
feel good excuse for people to fly their planes
Yeah.
and get a tax write off to do so? Because it's an expensive hobby, and there's potentially more efficient, effective ways of doing this by using those exact same resources to buy commercial plane,
Mhm.
train, or bus tickets.
Yeah, that's not a mean question, or that's not a devil's advocate question. I think that's a perfectly fair question, because we are not the solution for every case, which is why we work by referral with partner organizations who are basically doing the case management with people to figure out what the best options are for them. For some people, it might be just be like giving them some gas money and they make the drive. And so I'll just give you one particular example of a couple passengers that I flew. And so they were coming from a southern state to Illinois, and they one didn't own a car, two didn't have a car they could borrow, three they were too young to rent a car. So all the car options are off the table. Um, from mass transit perspective, well, actually, I'll go to before I even get into airlines. Airlines, there's no direct flights between where they lived and to where they were going, so you're talking a big, huge affair to travel by airline. But two, as you can imagine, if they don't have a car, guess what? They also have never flown by airline. So navigating TSA, getting to gates, knowing how all that stuff works, I think there's a lot we take for granted. Those of us that fly airlines on a semi-regular occasion, that for somebody who is low resource,
Mm-hmm.
that could be its own set of traumas that they experience. So airlines are not the best option for them necessarily in a lot of cases. But also looking at buses and trains, the fastest bus or train option was a 9-hour trip. And mind you, it's like a 4 or 5 hour drive if you have a car. And so And certainly some of our partners, they do have volunteer drivers on occasion. We'll make that kind of a drive for somebody, but volunteers are a limited resource. And so instead of having to make that 8 or 9 hour train trip each way, I was able to fly them in about an hour between where they lived and Illinois to get to where they needed to go. And that meant, they didn't have to travel the day before their appointment. They could, travel the day of their appointment. It meant that, after care was done, they could go back, the same day. They didn't have to like wait for when the flight or the train or whatever was scheduled. It could get them back home because, in one particular kind of use case that I talk about, kind of a hypothetical example, is putting going by car, going by airline, going by bus. Driving is the fastest option if you had those three options. Airline would take about 12 hours one way, just because of when the flights are scheduled and not being able to fly direct. A bus to go the same route would be 24 hours on buses, and who knows what that would take. That frightens me,
Yeah.
and I feel like I'm pretty resourced to be able to figure that out. But with flying with one of our pilots instead is easily save them 30 hours of being away from home, which for the people that are coming to our partner organizations, they're very low or even no income sometimes. That means like whatever work maybe they do have access to or able to do, they can get back to that work, and they miss, because they're not getting paid time off to go do this. So they're losing income if they're having to travel. So that's more time away from that. The majority of people who get abortions already have children, which means that's more time away from their kids if they're taking these other options. It means more childcare expenses if they're not taking their kids with them, which most of the time they're not, because once you get to your appointment, because of the security and things with clinics, typically only the person who's getting care themselves can go in, unless it's a minor, in which case a parent can go with them. But for everybody else, only the person who's getting care can go into the clinic. And so all those things together, yes, I'll repeat again, we're not the solution for everybody, but for people in a lot of scenarios, we are a good solution for them. Kind of the last one that I'll mention about the airline example specifically is that, again, going to, if people are, if they don't have a car, they don't drive, that kind of a thing, the odds are they probably also don't have a driver's license. Well, you're not going to get through TSA without a driver's license. And so airlines may be an option right out for them. And I can't remember now if it's Greyhound or Amtrak, but one of the two also requires ID now. And so like even those options are off the table for people that don't have IDs. And so we do get occasion for people that are, just whether they're unhoused or just don't bother with having a driver's license, a current driver's license, that those options just aren't available to them.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And honestly, I kind of figured that was going to be the answer that you were going to give before I set you up for this question, but I didn't want to let you know ahead of time because I like making sure that we try to be do our due diligence and not just softballing and peddling propaganda from our own side on the things that we want to support. And I think
we do
we do.
Ahead. I was gonna say, and we do use airline tickets. If it's more than 500 miles, flying in small aircraft for more than 500 miles, from a cost perspective, is not a good use of resources. And so we'll usually ask the partner that's making the referral in that case, like, hey, does this person have ID to be able to travel by airline? Because if they do, it's probably going to be faster, and it's definitely going to be cheaper than going in a small aircraft. And so we definitely use both options because to us, it's about getting people where they need to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I wanted to just expand on a couple points you made there. I had the opportunity, honestly, the whole thing that set all of this up is one of your volunteers reached out to me and said that they wanted to take me up for a flight, which I did a couple days ago. And I mean, any chance I have to get an airplane, I will always take. So I almost feel a little guilty, I'm like, cool, yeah, sure. I'm doing the good things, helping an organization that's helping, women and transgender people get the care that they need. But I'm getting to do something that I really just enjoy doing by doing that. And then obviously he put me in touch with you. But with that, on the time aspect, we flew from my town about an hour north of the Twin Cities metro area. And we took a really super scenic way down circled around a bunch of landmarks and stuff to see it, just to get some nice footage for the video and everything. And then flew right over the top of Minneapolis. We took, I think, 3 circles around Minneapolis, which was actually pretty cool.
I bet.
And then,
Appreciate the invite, by the way.
yeah, well, it was.
God, just kidding.
He was saving that one.
Yeah,
I could tell.
No, I mean, it was really cool though. It's like, oh, there's Como Conservatory, and there's the Saint Stadium and all that. So doing all that, and then the trip back from Minneapolis to the airport in my little town, again, which would be an hour driving, took us 8 minutes.
Yeah, that's some like time travel stuff right there. Basically.
Yeah.
8 minutes to go 60 miles. So just to put into perspective the time difference that makes, but then also being here in Minnesota, and Minneapolis is the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport is one of the only serious international airports where you can get relatively reasonable flights out of in. It would be probably Milwaukee or Chicago to the east of us. I don't even know where to the south of us or to the west.
Direct flights?
Yeah.
You can get direct flights pretty much from Minneapolis almost anywhere.
No. I mean, if you're going to go to a different airport. So, like, if you live in the Midwest, in, like, this area, so if you're in North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, you're either going to Minneapolis.
Oh, sure.
For a flight, or you're going to, if you're in Wisconsin, you have the option of maybe like Milwaukee or Green Bay or Chicago. But like if you're in Iowa, if you're in the Dakotas, if you're in that area, like Minneapolis is the airport you're probably going to take. And I know people that to get on a flight drive 4, 5, 6 hours just to get on an airplane to go on vacation wherever they're going, because Minneapolis is the closest airport, and I'm sure a lot of other rural places around the country have a very similar situation. I know a lot of other rural places around the country have a very similar situation, because I've lived or traveled to those places, and I know how far you have to drive just to get to those places. And obviously people live in all of these places, and the more rural you get, the more economically disadvantaged people tend to be, and to just get that 4 or 5, even if it's a 2-hour drive or a 1-hour drive to get to an airport, may be something that's an insurmountable obstacle for people who don't have a car, because a lot of times if that's the case, you're also not going to have any sort of public transportation to get you to these places or anything like that. And I would assume that elevated access really shines in those situations of helping people, because there's little airports everywhere. Like I don't.
And we've
Oh, go ahead.
We've also combined, for people that are in those rural places that are trying to get to like Minneapolis, St. Paul, or to get to wherever they do have airline options where it's hours away. Like we have done flights from like a small rural airport, that little piece of concrete that people don't realize is just in their outside their town that small airplanes are using all the time. Like we can fly somebody from there to an airline hub, so that they don't have to make that multi-hour drive to get there, especially if they don't have a car to make that drive.
No, and that's incredible. And honestly, that was where I kind of thought when I asked that question was going to be one of the biggest advantages to elevated access, and the fact that you guys are able to offer that, because again, you get into these bigger rural states, and there's no way for a lot of economically disadvantaged people to get there, because we don't invest in public transportation, and there isn't an international airport in everybody's backyard where it's easy to just get on a affordable flight to wherever you need to go. And so that's awesome. Flying, getting on a plane to fly people to a plane, is just as needed as flying them to their final destination sometimes.
It's almost like we should have a post office for transportation. They go everywhere. Snow, sleet, rain.
We should. That would be called trains, high-speed rail, which...
I mean, not necessarily, just think it's a network that's all combined: airline, train, and vehicle travel. That's what the post office is. It's not just little cars that drive around your neighborhood.
That is true. Yeah, it would be like, I guess that's what travel agents do, sort of.
Right, just nationalized
Travel agencies. There we. I mean, travel agencies are kind of running out of, I think, like a market to existence since like Priceline and shit exists now. So
Right.
like maybe that's what we need to do to save the travel agents is just nationalize the travel agent. In fact, the U.S. military is still one of the biggest uses of travel agents. Like most of the travel agents that still have decent practices. I plow for one in North Branch, and she's a travel agent. And I'm like, how are you doing this well as a travel agent in 2024? I'm like, the fucking military. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That DoD budget, man.
Right. I mean, I guess they
Yep.
don't have internal people.
$500 toilets and $1,000 hammers.
Yep.
Right. They just have orders, and like they don't have enough admin people within each unit to like buy 200 plane tickets and coordinate all over the place. So,
Right. Well,
yeah.
because they need to coordinate transportation from these people's houses or bases to the airports. Because the U.S. military uses a ton of public commercial.
I've never flown on a military airplane, and I've flown for the military a bunch of times.
Exactly. So yeah. So I mean, there's got to be people doing that, and obviously, if they can outsource it to private organizations where they can, pay rich people a profit margin for that, that's what the military is going to do. So
We love doing that.
they do love privatizing shit. So the next kind of just question along the lines of funding is private planes are also expensive. You already covered this, and I love when people answer the questions and I'm like, oh cool, I got all this stuff already laid out that I'm gonna boom boom boom, and then they answer it in previous stuff. But a lot of the pilots cover most of these expenses. What resources does elevated access provide? Just in general, I mean, aside from just an organizing resource, if the pilots are paying for the majority of their travel expenses, what resources is elevated access itself supplying?
Sure. So we do airline tickets. So in terms of the actual transportation, so the volunteer pilots are paying for the expenses on that side of things, and that goes for whether it's me as executive director and founder, I'm paying that out of my own pocket for my own money. To airline tickets, when we use airline tickets, and besides for the long distance, we also use airline tickets to make sure that our pilots never feel pressured to make unsafe decisions about weather or other things. So we're like, hey, don't worry about it if you have to cancel. Well, if airline's not an optimal choice for you know for these people, but we can back you up with that. So make safe choices. But as you can imagine, with a network of over 400 pilots, trying to facilitate this whole process takes a lot of effort and a lot of systems to make all that stuff work. And so we have to make sure that we are getting kind of from the start of getting pilots vetted to be part of our network all the way to when a request comes in from a partner organization, making sure we have all the details we need, the arrival dates and times are correct, weights of the passengers are what we need to know, because with small aircraft and really aircraft of all sizes, we have to know the total weight that we're going to carry. It's
And
just
flying
airlines
women
have
around, I'm
100.
sure they love answering that question.
Well, it's like it is the unfortunate side of things that but we have to ask it.
No,
So,
I know. Obviously, being
um,
around the aviation industry and taking people flying, it's always the sorry, but you got to tell me how much you weigh, and I don't want the weight
yep,
you tell everybody else. I need your actual weight here type of question. But
yep,
no. Anyway, go
yep.
ahead.
And then once we, so when we get a request in, we make sure everything's good to go in terms of the details we need. Then we put out the kind of the logistical parts to our pilot roster based on pilots we've identified that are in good locations to be able to do a particular trip. And then it's communicating with each of them, answering questions they might have, waiting for them to check with like their work schedule or airplane schedule or whatever it might be, kids softball game schedule, to see if they're available to do the trip. Once we get a pilot that says yes, then we have to get passenger contact information to the pilot and get pilot information to the passenger. Make sure the passengers complete waiver forms. Make sure that the pilot fills out their forms before they do the flight. All that kind of stuff. And then monitor the flight to make sure everything goes okay. And snafus do happen. Thankfully, don't happen a lot, but they do happen. Somebody, doesn't order their Uber in time enough to get to the airport on time, or gets to the airport and can't figure out where they're supposed to go, and so us and the pilot are trying to help them figure out where they're supposed to go to meet the pilot. Those kinds of things.
Hmm.
Um, and other things that we do too is that um, it's important to me that we bring along our pilots. They signed up for this organization knowing what we do, but somebody could be coming at this from a very surface level perspective of just thinking about, like, oh, I want to help people get abortion. And so we talk about and try to bring our pilots along around understanding abortion, understanding gender affirming care. We do a lot of things to make sure that the community that we've built up of hundreds of pilots, thousands of donors, to know, why are trans rights important? Why is gender affirming care important? What is so wrong about the gender affirming care propaganda that's out there about the gender affirming care uh, that minors are receiving? The right is really good at propaganda,
They are excellent at it.
and and people listen to it. And so there's a lot of, even though people might be coming at this like, hey, I want to support people and help people, they still might have some of those things in the back of their head. There might be some question, and so we do education too to make sure people understand. And then the last thing is, in terms of the resources, is we have a lot of risk management that we have to do. Thankfully, we do get access to attorneys for a lot of things we do on a pro bono basis, but it's still, of course, we have to have the members of the team to talk to the lawyers to, like, hey, we're doing this. Are we within the legal framework? Are we, what do we need to change? Are we taking too big of a risk here? What is what is that we should be doing different? All that kind of stuff, because with the current environment, and hopefully things don't get worse here after election day. Actually, I expect on some level things will get worse for a little bit,
Oh
because
yeah.
I think everybody expects violence from the Trump supporters if he loses. But like, um, there's going to be a lot of work to do no matter who wins, because elections don't fix problems. They don't make problems in and of themselves. They can make things better or worse, but they don't in and of themselves.
Mhm.
The government's not going to save us.
Well, and even if the presidential election goes the way that we're hoping, it doesn't mean that we'll have the power in Congress to pass any legislation to solve any of these problems either, because despite what everybody seems to think, the president doesn't actually do that much. They don't write legislation. They don't write policy. They sign bills and put forth a general idea or plan. And I think that's lost on a lot of people. So
Yeah.
even and a lot of big legislation takes more than just a simple majority lead to get passed. So
Yeah, with the filibuster these days, you need
Yep.
60% damn near.
mhm. and so
Uh-huh.
that's and we're not going to have that in the Senate, no matter what. I
No.
mean, if we hold control of the Senate, it'll be a miracle. I mean, I'm not holding out hope for that. I do think we're going to lose the Senate. I'm hoping that we take control, or yeah, take control of the House. There's potential there. Um,
It's very tight, yeah, especially in the Senate. It's
mhm.
really going to be tough. But I was curious, Mike, about like the Texas laws specifically about
Mhm.
um, I've heard a bunch of stuff about people like informing on people and
Mhm.
like you're not supposed to leave the state. I think for abortions, I don't know if that law is still in effect or what, but like how do you are you aware of what's going on and like how does that affected you guys at all?
Oh no, I have no idea. I don't know. I have any clue. We're just out here doing things willy nilly. No, no. Those are obviously really important conversations that we have to have. And again, going back to my point about propaganda,
Mm,
a lot of a lot of legislation that we hear about, social media in particular, is like, it may not be to the point that's actually been signed by a governor or anything like that. It could just be like some schmuck put up a thing in his committee in Texas, and it got some headlines, and now people think that's what's happening in
Mhm.
yeah.
Texas. Um, And so, from what's actually going on in terms of like the legal stuff in Texas, is that for people that are traveling outside of Texas to perceive abortions outside of Texas, there's nothing illegal that they're doing, nothing illegal that anybody who helps them is doing. And so, and there have been there's both some propaganda there about what's illegal, not illegal, but also there have been some court cases, one that said no, people can travel between states, just like people go to Vegas and gamble their life savings away. You don't get arrested back in your home state where gambling's illegal. So, and so it's, that can change, and that's why elections are important, and not just like who's being voted on, but the judges they put in place, or the judges that are being elected in places that elect judges.
Right.
And so we got to make sure we're vigilant, because those things can change. Any time that that somebody goes forum shopping and gets a judge to like, oh hey, you're one of our friends, you'll decide things like we want you to decide. So.
No, and that's true. I think most of that's just been introduced to legislation that hasn't been passed, but they have been definitely trying to pressure or push legislation, at least within the more conservative parts of the Texas state legislature, which is saying something.
Yeah, the places that are like have actually done stuff like people often have heard about. Both Idaho and Tennessee have passed legislation about minors traveling out of state for abortion, but in both cases, you can't help a minor get out of state without parental consent. And in Idaho, it's a pretty informal consent requirement. In fact, I was just reading about a case about, and it's really tragic. It's I think she's 12 or 13, got pregnant. Her mom is in jail, and she's basically being taken care of by one of her aunts. And so getting consent from her mother, who's a drug addict, struggling with drug addiction, that's a whole affair. In Tennessee, the legislation, again, requires parental consent. And what they actually want is a notarized letter of consent by both parents. And it's like,
Wow.
you're asking people that are probably, low resourced already to be able to do that. But two, like, one of the parents might somehow be involved with why that child is pregnant. And,
Right.
you're basically continuing the abuse with that. But in both Idaho case or legislation's case and Tennessee's, both of them are currently enjoined from being enforced, because they're basically, judges have said, this isn't right. We're going to put these on pause until we have this lawsuit figured out to see whether these laws should be on the books or not.
Yeah, that seems insanely unconstitutional. But Tennessee is going to do Tennessee shit, and that sounds right up their alley, right there.
It's like, notary too, like not just like a signed document.
Yeah.
Like the only thing I've ever had notarized is a mortgage. When I bought a house, they have a notary there who like signs the paperwork, and they're like, "Yep, you're definitely that person." I've never had anything else notarized.
Really? That's weird. I've had some weird shit. In North Carolina. Yeah, North Carolina? Yeah, North Carolina. I bought a car there once, and to transfer the title, I had to have it notarized. And I actually, I found, because it wasn't something that I knew needed to be done, and so, you have to go either get a notary when you transfer the title for a car and have them do that, or the DMV has, the people at the DMV are notaries, and they'll do it for you, but then you have to meet the other person there at the DMV to do it, which is insanely obnoxious.
Very inconvenient, I think.
Because, DMV hours are super convenient for anybody with a work schedule.
Yeah, obviously. That's what they're known for.
Uh-huh. And that's not the case here, so I had no idea. I was down there in college, and thankfully I found a notary who was sympathetic to me and did things notaries aren't supposed to do to get that title transferred. But
way to out them.
Yeah. Well, I didn't say who it was or what car or anything
we'll
like that.
We'll find it.
Yeah. Dig deep. From 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
You just gave us a timeline. Just helped us out.
10, 20, 15, somewhere in the last 2 to 3 decades.
Taylor, I think what you're saying is we don't put Jared on the stand for anything.
Yeah,
that's right.
Because he'll start talking.
Exactly.
But no, it's just crazy. Like in the South, some of the just insane shit that they require down there. I don't know. It's a crazy place to just visit to live, and I can't imagine having to go through something because it was a nightmare for a car to just get a notary lined up to help with that situation. Uh, and I can't imagine when obviously this is a time sensitive issue. It's a emotionally sensitive issue. It's a physically sensitive issue, and now it's like, oh, now we need a fucking notary and to bring the government even more into this than they already shouldn't be. It just seems asinine to me. And I don't know. You're flying them to Disneyland, and in the process, they're just the abortion's secondary. They don't need parental consent for that, right?
Yeah, that's
I'm not speaking about minors per se,
Mhm.
but one of the things that we've had passengers tell us, but also others, is like it's not something I plan to do with the organization. Is like to have this be like a fun, like enjoyable experience, but like you know, like I said earlier, or alluded to earlier, is like the vast majority of our passengers have never flown on an airplane before
Mhm.
of any sort. And so, like, actually, the passenger I flew yesterday, I'd flown them previously, and on the previous flight, she had mentioned that she liked to play flight simulators. So yesterday, it was really nice and smooth. So I
Mhm.
was like, you know what?
Take
Do
the
you want to fly? And
controls.
they're like, yeah. Yep. So she flew us basically. I did the takeoff and the landing, and she flew the rest of the time, and so she got to have a blast and really appreciated that too. So
Well, that is super awesome. Actually, on the flight I did before this, that put all this together, that pilot was kind enough to let me take the controls for a little bit, and I've been fortunate enough to do that in the past, just being around it. But it's always something fun. There's something super cool about having your hands on the yoke of a plane, and the fact that you get to give people the opportunity who will probably never have that opportunity again and have never had it before is pretty incredible. And if it sounds insane to you listening, flying a plane's super easy. The flying part it almost does it itself. In fact, you trim it right, it does do it itself. But the takeoff and the landing, that's the sketchy part. Um,
yeah,
what's
anytime you're near the ground, that's when you can get yourself hurt.
mhm.
So
what
you got to know what you're doing at
what's
those
the show? Is it
points.
Friends or is it How I Met Your Mother? One of the characters is just always going on about, oh, planes just basically fly themselves these days. It's not even hard.
It's true though. They do. The takeoff and landing's a little different. Even my
So as
oh, go ahead.
as I say, as pilots, you hear a lot of like, especially airline pilots, like, oh, I've got 10,000 hours, I've got 6,000 hours. Like, for airline pilots in particular, a lot of it is once they get about 300 feet above the ground, they push the autopilot button and they
Mhm.
sit for 4 hours
Yep.
while the plane flies, and then they take over just before landing. And like that still takes skill, it still takes training and stuff. But like, those 4 hours in between, you were just sitting there watching the make sure the plane did what it was supposed to do.
Mhm.
Right.
And so like I also when I hear pilots throw out how many hours they have, I ask them like how many landings per hour do you have? Because the landings are the part that matters. So
Yep.
like for myself, I've got about 1,000 hours, and I think I have about 1,800 landings. So, because I'm doing a lot of teaching people to fly
Mhm.
when I'm flying now,
Do you
and
count touch
so
and goes as a landing?
yep, that counts as a landing. And so, because you're touching the ground, so
Mhm.
it's a landing. And so, those add up. But you get to, so I think that's the standard we should be measuring ourselves as pilots. But I'm not the one in charge of that stuff.
Oh, I mean, I'd absolutely agree. In fact, I think a good example of this is the book The Hatchet. Pretty sure that's the one. Did you ever read that in high school?
Doesn't sound familiar.
I
So
feel like it was more popular in the Midwest, like in
yeah,
Minnesota
you read
specific.
it,
Yeah.
yeah. So a kid is going, I don't know, to visit somebody somewhere in Canada or I don't know, somewhere out in the like northern wilderness, and in a small plane, and it's just him and this kid, and the pilot has a heart attack, and the kid doesn't know how to fly a plane, obviously. Can't get in touch with anybody because they're too far out of radio contact. And he flies the plane till it runs out of fuel and then crashes it. But like that's the general gist of how easy it is to fly. Yeah, you can if you just keep it above the ground, the plane wants to stay in the air as long as there's fuel in it.
Yeah.
And that's just it's awesome because then you get to give people those opportunities. And I know I've taken a plane. I've taken off a few times and put a plane on the ground once because my wife was kind enough to buy me a flying lesson. And the just an exploratory flying lesson or whatnot. And the flight instructor felt confident enough with my experience to let me actually land the plane. I'm like, I don't think you understand. Like, I'm not that experienced. I don't think that I should be doing this. And he's like, no, you got it. No hands or feet on the controls. And I'm like, just, my stomach does not normally get in my throat when I'm in a small aircraft. I'm like, I feel like we should have been on the ground a long time ago. Why are we letting half the runway go by? This does not feel right, and it is definitely a different experience putting the plane on the ground versus flying it. But
I thought for sure you were gonna say my wife bought me an RC plane that I landed.
I did own an RC plane
You know,
once. I
one of
never flew it.
we do demo flights with our partners so that they can talk to their clients about what it's like to fly in a small plane. And one of them said to me once when I was doing a demo flight for them, like she'd flown airlines a bunch of times, and she's like, "This is not at all what I expected because, my little, 200 horsepower airplane or 180 horsepower airplane, it's not like an airline where on takeoff you're getting thrown back into your seat, or on landing that I'm gonna slam on the brakes. It's really just more like most landings I don't even touch the brakes, and so it's just like coasting to a stop. And so, for people that might be scared of flying, the everything's a lot gentler and not as loud and scary and stuff. And so it's an extra, one of those nice things that we can provide for people too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so getting kind of back on the topic of, because I'll talk about flying stuff all day. To the organization and funding, and we talked a little bit about that. But how does Elevated Access get its funding, for one? How is that managed, allocated, and spent? And what level? Because obviously you have a lot of anonymity. I can never say that word. And I think I got it that time, didn't I? Anonymity. That sounds right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Somehow.
What level of transparency do you have for people who are supporting the organization or interested in supporting the
Sure.
organization? Obviously, um, how ethically nonprofits spend their money is a huge issue with a lot of nonprofits. And obviously, you guys make enough money where you work full time, and we know a lot of nonprofit CEOs are overpaid versus the amount of funding that actually goes to care. And obviously, that's not the case with you if you're worried about $3,000 avionics upgrades. But I think that's a question that hopefully, if people are listening and interested in donating to your organization, may want to know a little bit more about.
Sure. Yeah, so as a 501c3, we have to file taxes every year. So, and also because of the amount that we raise, we have to have an outside audit done of our finances every year. So when we say we're spending X dollars on our programs, which is the providing flights for people, the auditors are saying, "Yep, this looks like a legitimate either estimate or exact number, however you want to put it." Even to the point, like I asked them on our last audit to in terms of estimating the kind of the in-kind donation that our pilots are making, I came up with a formula, and they're like, that looks logical and that makes sense to us. So yeah, you can use that number, and we'll say like we agree with that. That is a fair number to use. So at this point, we are getting probably about 60% of our funding from foundations, and about 40% from small donors, and so it's not any particular one way or the other. But I can tell you that foundations do not lightly make contributions to organizations, and so we're trying to make sure that we are responsible with those funds. Where we question, if something seems like, hey, this doesn't seem right. Like, would we want this in a newspaper article? Like, let's maybe not do that thing. So it's definitely something I'm very conscious of. I'm actually not the highest paid person in the organization. One of the women that works in the organization makes more than I do, and I'm the one who set her salary. So it's not like somebody else forced me to. It's like, no, this is the salary salary that you said you need in order to do this job and what you could get elsewhere. And so I'm going to make sure that you're paid fairly and
You know,
appropriately.
they're supposed to make less than
And
you. That's like the requirement in
I
the
heard
United
70
States.
cents on the
yeah,
Yeah,
dollar.
70,
Actually,
you should be making at least 30% more than her.
yeah. And there's a lot of, kind of we talked about with Justin about societal expectations, all right, about around things. And one of the societal expectations that we have is that if you work in nonprofits, that you should be struggling to put food on the table and pay
Hmm.
rent or pay your mortgage, that kind of stuff. And now, mind you, we're not like nobody's getting rich
Hmm.
working for us,
yeah.
but like because of the financial support that we've had, um, you know, we just did our benefits planning for next year, and I was like, okay, we're in good financial shape. I don't feel like we're going to run out of money in the next 6 months, and so like, you know what? Let's make it so the employees can have better health insurance options. And like, also we'll start covering dental and vision insurance because again, going to the government's not going to save us and not going to fix
Hmm.
things for us. So that means like if we've got the resources as an organization, it's not just the people we're transporting that we need to take care of. We need to make sure that the people who are doing the work are able to do it on a daily basis without stressing like, oh man, my tooth's hurting, I can't afford to go to the dentist, or that kind of stuff. I want to make sure that the people in the organization feel supported in that way too.
And I'm jealous I couldn't have gotten hired by you
So
for
hopefully people.
first out of college, because my first job out of college was a nonprofit, and they definitely made sure I struggled to put food on the table in the
Yeah,
process. So
yeah,
no, that's awesome that you do that, and I think that that's obviously everybody who does full time work deserves full time pay and a livable wage, and that goes for nonprofit work as well.
yeah,
I think that there's definitely a happy medium in there because a lot of people, a lot of organizations allow their higher management to exploit that nonprofit status and overpay their executive staff, and obviously
mhm,
that's not what they should be doing either. But um, there's definitely a disparity between most of the people who work in nonprofit and what they
yeah,
get paid. And again, you shouldn't have to struggle in the richest country in the world to pay your bills, to put food on the
yeah.
table, to just enjoy your life. And I don't get that need to suffer because you're doing the Lord's work, so to speak, in the
Yeah.
royal way. And so
And
that's
and I'll
that's
say
awesome.
too, besides like the supporting the staff like and supporting our passengers, is that we also working with we have over 100 organizations that I've onboarded to work with us around the country that send us are able to send us referrals. About 70 of them are active with sending us referrals for people needing support, and with some of them, especially the ones that are like maybe they have a $2,000 a month budget. If they reach out to us and like we can't get a volunteer pilot, we'll be like, hey, we can't, and it might be like a long trip. Like we'll tell them like, we can take on the airline expense if
Hmm.
since you don't have the funds maybe to do many people, because like if we're able to take on that airline expense, that might be two or three other people they can support without draining their budget. Or if we're able to fly somebody on the day of their appointment instead of the day before, that's one less night in a hotel room that they have to spend for one less day of travel
Hmm.
expenses, all those kinds of things. And so, you know, really one of the things I look at as what we do is just being a multiplier for everybody else that's helping other people, because aviation, like you were saying earlier, is not a cheap thing, but it can definitely amplify capacity and help improve lives in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. I think I heard about your organization quite a while ago. I've known you've existed for a long time. Just in the sphere of uh, um, social advocacy that I try to do with my platform, but had never thought that I'd be sitting here, talking to you or being able to collaborate with your organization. I'm glad I have, and I really support what you guys do, and I'm happy to hear that you do a lot more than even I knew about just come from my peripheral knowledge of your existence. Um,
Yeah, thank you too, and like I think I want to say thank you to you too for what you do out there in social media in particular, and what you're trying to do with the podcast of like reaching out to people to have community to bring them along on these different journeys. What was funny is like I got the email from our pilot
Hmm.
that said that they had talked to you while I was watching one of your TikToks.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
So
So
you
very,
were
very funny coincidence.
you didn't look my stuff up after he sent all
No,
that
I,
out?
was- I was I started looking at it more
Yeah.
afterwards. I think I was already following you,
Oh.
but no, I definitely, um, you know, like your content and stuff.
Well, I
So thank
appreciate
you for
that.
doing that.
And one of the things I've noticed about doing this is the world gets a lot smaller, and it's really cool. It gets a lot smaller in really awesome ways like this. And obviously the aviation industry or aviation community is really small as well. And it's cool to be a part of that and have kind of uh the opportunity to be involved adjacent to it. And I appreciate you being here with us. Just the housekeeping aspects of it for your organization, kind of the action that people can do. Obviously, pilots who have access to an aircraft are needed probably the most for what you do
Mhm.
for your organization to run. But there's a lot of people out there who are more gravitationally challenged. And is there anything that like they can do to help the organization beyond donating, or obviously and donating, and how they do that? But what do you guys need to be successful in your mission and make this organization help as many people as possible?
Yeah, so one of the things I tell people when they ask about getting involved in reproductive justice is going to organizations and asking what they need. And so, whether it be if you think there's something you can or want to do for us. So, obviously, people can go to our website, elevatedAccess.org, to donate. Follow us on social media. If you're on, we're most active on Instagram, is where we put most of our content. If you're on places like Instagram, make sure you turn off the political filter because Meta believes that abortion and gender affirming care are political topics, and so won't show you content about those subjects
I'm
unless you
all too
turn off
aware
the
of that
little checkbox.
problem.
Yep. And so those kinds of things. Um, on our website, there is a page called Ways to Help. And so, besides donating, things you can do is we have a flyer that you could print out and take it to your local small airport and put it at the airport office building. They usually have a bulletin board, and you can
Mhm.
put something up there. You can help organize fundraisers. People can put up on their birthday. If you're still on Facebook, if you have a generation that uses Facebook, you can do a birthday fundraiser and select Elevated Access as the organization. And then lastly is, if you hear about people needing help, is definitely make sure that they know that there are others out there willing to help them. For gender affirming care, we work with providers a lot so people can ask their doctor, or they can also ask like the local LGBT center oftentimes is connected to us in some way. And then around abortion is ineedana.com is a really great site because people can find not only where to get an appointment and what is available in their state, but also can find what procedure funding is available, as well as what practical support organizations exist to help them get to and from their care. One of the people that I flew this summer, coming from a southern state, um, one of the things that she said to me, because she asked me like, so what's it costing you to do this for me? Because she was facing a 5 or 6 hour drive versus a 1 hour flight, and I said, you know, uh, I just kind of came up. I decided to come up with a lowball number because I didn't want her to think, it was costing a whole lot. But she's like, wow, like I've been blown away by how generous everybody has been to try to make sure that I can get to my appointment and have everything taken care of and stuff. And so, if you're out there trying to figure out how else you want to be involved, besides helping people connect to those organizations, is you can also go to ineedana.com and see what organizations are supporting your state, your community, and donate to them too, because uh, the the outrage funding, as we called it, from
Mhm.
2022 has slowed down for a lot of organizations, including ourselves. And so, support Elevated Access, support your local abortion fund, support your local practical support organization, support your LGBT centers. Just look around your community, and if money's not your opportunity to give, ask them what they need, and they might tell you like, well, we don't need anything from you today, but thank you. Or they might say like, this is what we want you to do, and then do your best to do that thing.
Absolutely. And obviously, just anything anybody can do is sharing stuff like this. Anything that your media puts out, sharing your page, sharing podcasts like this, sharing videos of creators like myself, and I know that there's lots of others like Cheese Pilot, although he's not doing as much right now, who have brought awareness to this organization. Just bringing awareness to more, because I did just a very minor plug kind of leading into this on my channel a little while back, and the number of people who didn't know that the organization existed at all, and were really excited to hear about it was pretty cool to see, but disheartening to know that it hasn't gotten the publicity where it's just a household name type of thing too. So helping with that is obviously a big thing, I think, for any nonprofit organization that's doing this kind of work. But speaking of that kind of work, it's great that your organization exists, and it's pretty fucking horrible that it has to. Um, what should people be doing to help make your organization irrelevant, and what is Elevated Access doing beyond the direct care of bringing people places? Are you guys involved in any other activism or lobbying or anything along those
Sure.
lines? Yeah.
Well, as a 501c3, our lobbying is pretty limited because if you lobby, you can't. I think it's 10% of your effort can be towards lobbying. So most nonprofits just don't do it because it becomes an accounting nightmare because you have to track it all.
Some
So
get
we
away
don't do
with
any
it
lobbying.
though.
Yeah,
Certain
yeah. Oh
ones.
yeah, some do. Well, churches. But anyway, so one is to make sure that you're voting. Voting again is not going to fix things, but I keep telling people we
Helps not
gotta
make them
stop
worse.
things from going worse. Yeah, yep. And so, because even say we get really my as I've talked about like possible election outcomes, things could certainly get worse, but I feel like one of the things that we as an organization we've identified as one of our strengths is we're creative and we're nimble. It's like we'll find a way to help people as long as there's some legal framework that we can figure it out. But what makes me probably more scared is that if we were to get federal legalization for abortion and gender affirming care for all the times that people might need it, is that legalization by itself does not fix access problems. If you took a map of the United States and laid out what counties like their distance to travel for abortion, and then also laid out the counties that lack obstetric care in particular, and labor and delivery departments at hospitals, it's almost a one-to-one overlap. And so we've been looking at, because now that we have this resource of pilots, we've been looking at expanding into prenatal birthing and postpartum support, because if people there's no hospital within a 30-minute driving distance for them, which for a lot of people, there's millions of people already in that scenario. If they have a more challenging pregnancy, what are they going to do? And so we've been doing our homework and going to start looking at recruiting some partners in we're looking at probably Tennessee, Florida, and Oklahoma as our first places to look at. Like, how can we help make sure that people have good birthing outcomes if they're trying to continue a pregnancy? Because what's happening broadly around healthcare, but especially around pregnancy, is really, really bad.
Isn't it amazing that the places that trying to force women to have babies also have the least amount of care and support for them to have those babies? Which,
And it's only getting worse.
yep, yeah.
Yep.
No, and then so do you guys take like direct contact from people needing transportation, or is it all referral? Like, can people reach out to you directly if they need something, or is this
Um,
yeah?
For abortion, we tell people to go to ineedana.com to look up the organization, because everybody in the abortion space is familiar with us and probably already onboarded with us. Only if they're a relatively new organization, maybe they not onboarded with us already, and we can onboard them really quickly if they go through one of those organizations. For
Okay.
gender affirming care, usually what we tell people is ask your provider first to see if they've already onboarded with us and are familiar with us, and kind of start the process from there. There are some other options that we have available, but generally that's where we tell people to start, because that's usually going to be what we want to do. But certainly, one of the other things we've been talking about is expanding our program to include kind of almost like a case management for people who are traveling for gender affirming care, because if they need, because they're often coming to us like, hey, I need to get from A to B for my gender affirming care. Um, Sometimes they don't have money for their hotel stay while they're there. Sometimes they don't have money for food because the infrastructure that exists around abortion does not exist around gender affirming
Hmm.
care. And so we've been looking at expanding, what we do there. Some of our abortion partners are looking at expanding into gender affirming care as well, because they see the parallels, and gender affirming care still fits within reproductive justice, because if you don't have control of your own body and your own future, well, guess what? That's still gender affirming care.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, absolutely. I
But certainly people can reach out to us if they just don't know where to turn, because trying to remember all that stuff can be difficult. We'll always try to get people to the right resource that can help them.
and does your website have the links and resources for them to A, reach out to you, or B, find ineedana.com, or like all these other resources that you've been mentioning here? They can find all that through your website as well.
On our website, they can fill out our contact form, and if they were to say I need help traveling for an abortion, it'll point them to ineedana.com. And if they're looking for support for traveling for gender affirming care, they'll fill out the regular contact form, and then we'll help them navigate it from there.
That is truly incredible work you guys are doing. I I appreciate that you guys have been taking your time out to do that. I appreciate you guys have taken the time to talk to us and help us spread this message, because again, it really sucks that it sucks that you have a job right now. But it's amazing that you do. It's amazing that you have put this together, that you've been a community organizer in such a conservative, male dominated space to help with the topic, an issue that affects women, and a very divisive, politically divisive issue, and it's truly incredible work that you've been
Yeah.
doing.
Well, Jordan, thank you for saying that. And I'll say too, like, it does affect men too. While yes, we're not the one that may need an abortion, but like, if your girlfriend, your wife, your daughter, like, and you're living in one of these banned states, like, are you going to be able to get to Colorado? Are you going to be able to get to Illinois? Are you going to be able to get to New Mexico to get the care that she needs? Maybe she's actually wanting to go continue with her pregnancy, and something happens along the way and her life gets at risk, and the doctor is going to be able to provide care to save her life, or to protect her fertility so that she maybe can try again to have a child in the future. Like, I mean, those things affect men too. And we're maybe not on the front line facing the brunt of it, but it does affect us.
Absolutely, and just the unintended consequences of this that we were talking about recently, but like uh, gynecologists and doctors are fleeing places like Idaho because they're
Hmm.
not allowed to do their job there. Because a lot of times, yeah, a non-viable pregnancy requires an abortion, and they aren't in a position where they feel comfortable providing that level of care in that state, because that could result in them losing their license, or worse, going and facing
Hmm.
criminal charges. And so them fleeing those states to places where they can, they're allowed to do the job that they went to school to do, and they are the experts in their field at doing, leaves women in those families, men and women in those states, unable to get just the basic prenatal care and delivery care and that sort of thing that they need in those specific areas, because the medical staff just doesn't exist in those places anymore because they've left.
Yeah.
And so, no, it absolutely does. Women's rights are human rights, and they affect every single one of us. And it is incredible that you guys are putting yourself out there, to continue to perpetuate, um, some level of humanity and equity, in places that have been robbing people of that. So we really appreciate the work that you're doing. Um,
Thank you.
is there anything else you want to share with everybody here before we end this?
I'll just say again, go vote. I know. I think this episode going to come out before
Yep.
election
Yep.
day.
I'm trying to get all
You
this
know,
stuff out before the
hopefully,
election day. I
yeah,
think abortion
good.
is the biggest issue
Yeah, it'll
on
probably come
Yeah.
out on election day. Yeah.
You know,
election day.
Yeah.
you know, you know, a lot of states do allow same day voter registration. Just because you haven't
Mhm.
registered to vote yet doesn't mean you can't walk in and do your voter registration and vote then and there. If you've moved and didn't update your voter registration, you can still do a provisional ballot in most places, probably every place. You know, go make sure that your vote is out there because you know
Absolutely.
in American history, the majority of people don't vote. And
Mhm.
guess what? If we followed public opinion with how many people actually voted, the country would be very, very
Very different.
different today and be a lot
Mhm.
better if everybody voted.
Honestly, I think this might be important enough. We may release this episode just a couple days early.
Yeah, we could.
I
Absolutely.
think I don't see a problem with that. I want to make sure that this is on people's minds before they head to the polls. And yeah, same day registration is absolutely a thing. If you haven't done it, most states do allow it. Don't stop you from trying to go do it. I know Emily, since we got married and her last name changed, she was no longer registered. I didn't even realize it. Minnesota is thankfully
Hmm.
pretty lenient on this stuff, and we did absentee voting, and they just mailed the form for her to fill out to mail in with her absentee ballot. So yeah, don't let anything deter you. This is really important. It truly affects everybody, and make sure that you get out there and you do this because you know if you're not doing it for yourself, you're doing it for people. You know, you're doing it for the children and the grandchildren and the mothers and sisters and daughters and the husbands and brothers and everybody in your life. It's important. This truly affects everybody. And obviously the fact that you've got hundreds of people out here willing to donate their time and their resources to literally fly people to the places they need to go just shows the gravity of how important this issue is, I think. And I appreciate you doing what you're doing.
Thanks, Jordan.
I appreciate everybody who listens and is tuned in for these. And again, we do this because y'all listen to us and take the time out of your day, which we appreciate the hell out of. The fact that you are willing to take an hour plus, usually an hour and a half, because we never know when to shut the fuck up. And listen to us ramble on here. That's the reason we do this. Unfortunately, we live in a capitalist hellscape, and all this shit costs money and costs us our time. And so, if you do want to support beyond listening, which again, listening is always enough, but if you want to support beyond listening, we have a Patreon, we have YouTube subscriptions.
Yeah, and obviously in this case, definitely feel free to send something to Elevated Access as well, or in lieu of supporting us.
Yeah,
because
no.
the work you guys are doing is, maybe just a little bit more impactful.
Absolutely.
On some day-to-day lives that are being harmed by some of these legislations.
If it's an either or situation, please donate to Elevated
Yes.
Access or their situations. If it's a both, we appreciate the hell out of that.
Right.
And yeah, you can get Let Them Eat Toast merch at offjawagon.com. You can watch us in video form on YouTube. The whole podcast is on video form, and you can see Mike's blurry face here if you're interested in that. Otherwise, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. And then follow Off Your Wagon on TikTok and YouTube and Instagram. Follow Elevated Access on. Do you guys have a TikTok? Yeah, you do have a TikTok.
We do. It's not very active, but yeah, we do have one.
TikTok, Instagram. Do you have a YouTube as well?
Yeah, I think it's mostly just like our kind of overview video of what we do, and maybe a couple other videos that we've put together. But yeah,
cool. They're big things. Instagram.
Really,
yep.
Yeah.
Follow them there. Please support them. Even if it's again just sharing their message, sharing what they do. We appreciate that. And we will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for taking so much time out of your day with us today here, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate it, Jordan and Taylor, and have a good one.